Welcome to Heart of the Wild with Tristan and Diana, where we are thrilled to have you here as we talk about all things wildlife, animal conservation, and life on safari. Today, we've got a really interesting topic to talk about. We're going to be talking about the ethics behind online posting with animals, snuggling with animals, TikTok stars that are animals. So we're really excited to dive in. Hello, Tristan.
Hey, Da. Hello, everybody. How's it, Da? How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, thanks. I can't complain. I'm still relaxing on leave, so nice and easy and chilled for me.
Love that. For those of you that are on video with us, Tristan has got a beautiful oceanic background versus his life in the bush background, which we love to see for him.
Yeah, no, I must say it's strange, especially with the camera setup because we're quite high up on like the hillside here. It honestly looks like I'm on a cruise, just traveling around the world. Which I just want to clarify, I'm not. I'm in Durban. I'm not on a big boat. Although that would be pretty cool and quite impressive to do a podcast from there.
Hey, you never know. Cruising around, chatting animals. I
Yeah,
don't hate that.
maybe Heart of the Wild hits the seas.
Yeah, love it. Amazing. Yeah, and I'm here in Spotify Studios where I come to you all the time. My home away from home. But I think this is a bit of a difficult one for me to talk about and even see. I think it's hard to rationalize where an animal can be maybe exploited online, or even to differentiate between when an animal is being treated well and cared for and, is part of the family as a wild animal and a pet, and when it's being treated as exploitive, and maybe being harmed behind the scenes. So, we want to shine a light on this really important topic. But Tristan, I want to get your thoughts. You work with animals every single day, and they're wild, and they're living free, as they should be. But I want to hear your thoughts about the ethics behind maybe these TikTokers that are using animals for clickbait or snuggling with them and showing them as these sort of pets.
Yeah, geez, it's a tough one. It's one that I've seen quite a lot of. I think just being in this industry and in the pages that I follow, the people that I follow, naturally in algorithms, my social media, my reels that pop up a lot have got to do with animals. And so I get to see it a lot. And I think, there's two sides to it. I think that there's a very fine line to what's ethical and what's unethical in this case. I think there's always a bigger story in the sense that, we might just be seeing one video or one picture of this animal. We don't actually know what's going on behind the scenes, So you might see someone that's like cuddled up with a lion, but you don't know like that lion could have been like trafficked through like the exotic wildlife train. So you just never really know. And it's a tough one. It's something that with myself, I'm quite lucky in the sense that I live out in the bush. I live out amongst all these wild animals that I've got so much ground to cover. I mean, in some areas there aren't even actually fence lines, but I mean, where I work is like 8 million acres, so it's huge. You get to witness these animals in their natural environment, and to see them not in a natural environment, for me personally, can actually be a little bit difficult, a little bit hard to see.
Yeah. Same. I think it's hard to differentiate too. I do know that we talk about a line. I want to know like when is that line crossed? And it's hard for me to even know where that line is crossed. And I think that's the difficult part with social media. I've worked in media and even at social media companies, and there's a lot of work being done to make sure that there are policies in place for as little harm to be done as possible. And I know that that is a whole other conversation in itself. But where it's interesting to me is that there are some people doing good things, right? So there's a lot of TikTokers and influencers and people that are on Instagram who are shining a light on animal rescue, for example. I think there's a woman named Felicia Wilson who was highlighted in NPR, an NPR article, and she is rescuing African servals and transporting them and highlighting her work being done on TikTok, for example. And she discusses how she is very careful about what she discusses and making sure that, the animals that she's rescuing, she doesn't share where they're coming from, so that people cannot buy, these exotic pets and have them as pets. And I think those are examples of positive things that are happening. But then you see on the flip side of that, people who are snuggling with lions, as you said earlier, or snuggling with these big cats, and maybe they're young and babies essentially, and then they get older and they're destructive, and you don't see that side of things. And I think that that's where it becomes really terrible and unethical, and you don't know what happens to them at that point, beyond all of the other difficult things that come into play, and as you mentioned too, like some of the trafficking of these animals. So I'd love to hear more about your thoughts there too.
Yeah, I mean, it's just there can be some like really ethical ways in which animals are portrayed on social media. Some of them is a lot for like educational purposes, with whether that's like bringing probably attention to an endangered species or an organization that is in need of help and funding, and that's how it works. I mean, you look at something like the Sheldrick Trust or the Jane Goodall Institute. I mean, they might use animals in the sense that, but they're very trusted. People know them, they're public. A lot of people have actually been to these places to visit, and they'll use animals that they've recovered from. A lot of the time it's poaching. Sometimes it's animals that I think have even been brought in. But they'll then use those animals in order to generate an income to keep doing the good work that they're doing, and I fully support that. I think that's great, and that's working really well. And in some cases, they can even rewild these animals. And I mean, I think, again, how special is that an animal can be brought in from either the wild and it's had like a terrible past, or maybe it's been brought in from somewhere else, from an animal breeder, from one of these farms that they basically exploit the exotic animal trade. And then you can rewild them. I think in some cases, though, you can't. Like, as far as I know, often these social media pages, these influencers, these people that especially are using big cats, that cat, if it's born in captivity, the likelihood of it actually surviving and making it out to the wild is next to none. I've actually been fortunate enough to speak to quite a lot of people in this industry that have worked with big cats, and I've raised the question before. I've asked, what happens if it's born in captivity, if it's raised by humans, and they're not going to survive out there in the wild? These animals learn so much, especially from their mother when they're out there in the bush. They're learning how to hunt, they're learning how to stalk. Yes, of course, they've got natural instinct, but unless they've actually been taught something by their mother or from the same species, like a lion within a pride, they're never going to really thrive out in the bush, and it just puts them on the back foot from the get-go. And a lot of the time, it's actually fake. I mean, people say that they're rewilding these animals, that they're helping them go out into the wild, but it's not true. And I've, we can talk about it a bit later, but I've got a great example of that.
Yeah, that is so infuriating, and it's just frankly, it's a selfish thing to do. If you're trying to exploit anything else, but we love animals, and in this case, we're talking about animals. It's a terrible, selfish thing to do, to exploit an animal for your own personal gain. I'm putting that out there for anyone that's even thinking about it. But I'm curious. I'm just telling it like it is. But I'm curious on what animals could potentially, now that you're talking about a lion or a big cat that can't be rewilded, are there any animals that could be rescued and rewilded from a scenario where they were brought up in captivity?
The art of a hunt is taught you by your mother. So it's something that us as a human, we just can't, we cannot teach it. We can't teach it nearly as effectively. There's been lots of effort. So I know with cheetahs especially, cheetahs in some areas are very endangered and really vulnerable. And so there have been efforts before and very ethical practices where they've actually tried to breed cheetahs within captivity with the idea then to rewild them. But then the people there are trying to teach them how to hunt. And I've seen numerous videos of them like dragging something behind a car, like dragging meat behind the car, trying to get this animal to learn to run, to chase, to grab, to bite, to like take down the animal. And very occasionally they do get it right, and it seems like an animal does have some level of success out in the wild, but unfortunately most of them don't. And so from that perspective, it's often herbivores that are then, have a much better chance in order to make it out there in the bush, because especially like if you're a grazer, for example, you eat grass, eh? No one has to teach you how to eat grass. You know exactly how to how to eat grass,
and then when you want grass, I don't know how to eat grass. So you might have to teach me.
Yeah. Maybe I wouldn't recommend it for us, eh? But yeah, like, you know, immediately, okay, I'm gonna eat grass. If you're born in captivity, and I've actually got first-hand experience with this. Where, how old was I? Jeez, I must have been 20 years old. I was working at a place called the Zululand Rhino Orphanage, which is doing such incredible work. They're still going now. Like, very, very amazing place. I'd like to actually get back there and see them and some of my friends there. But they specialize in rhino calves that have been brought in from poaching incidents, so where the mothers have been killed and this calf yet hasn't been weaned off, so it's still actually relying on milk. And they bring in these little rhino calves, and it's really traumatic for them, and it's traumatic for the people too. I mean, it's really difficult. You essentially now have to be the mother for this baby rhino. And so you start off by you make milk formulas that are actually designed for cattle. They seem to take that really well. And you feed them, you wean them off eventually over, like, you know, could be 8, 9, 10, even up to a year. You know, it could be quite like 10 months up to a year. You wean them off, and then you start introducing them to solid foods, so to grass. And they'll then be born, they'll be raised in that captivity. They'll be able to go out of, like, we call it a boma, which is like a sheltered, protected area. They can go out of that boma and they can go off into like a certain area. It's usually fenced off. It could be, you know, a couple hectares, quite a few acres big, so that they get the sense of being out there. They get the sense of being wild. They'll naturally graze. There's a watering hole. They can go out there. They can drink. And then, yeah, once they reach the age of, I think it was about 6 or 7 years old, then they can actually be released successfully out into the wild. And I mean, that's amazing. That's great. So that gives you a real good opportunity to boost the numbers of these animals, because they actually take to that very well. Elephants is another example of that. Giraffes, I believe, is another example that can be rewilded from an orphan, from a baby, eventually as they grow up. Zebra, although when I was working at this rhino orphanage, we had a zebra there. His name was Norman. He must have been orphaned. He was this young baby zebra.
Norman.
Yeah, so Norman. How he got the name Norman, I don't know. But the luckiest zebra you'll ever find, because he walked right into this rhino orphanage, and no one had the heart to send him back out into the wild. So you must know this orphanage is in the middle of a big 5 game reserve. So there's lions, leopards, there's wild dogs, there's hyenas, you know, cheetahs even. There's everything out there that could grab him. And so he walked into the orphanage, and all of us tried to raise him. We tried bottle feeding him. I mean, we were up literally like maybe 3-4 times a night. You had to be up every 2.5 to 3 hours to feed him, just like his mother would in the wild. That little guy, I promise you, the amount of bruises I had from him kicking you, he's such a wild animal. You know, you can't break the wild out of a zebra. There's a reason why you won't find a zebra in a fair, or no, you've never seen a picture of someone riding a zebra. You cannot break the wild out of them, which I love. But yeah, he then did grow up to be released out to the wild, and I believe he's doing just fine. But that's an example of something that I think is really difficult to try even raise in captivity in order to rewild.
Oh, wow. I love those examples for sure. And I know we've talked about working at Zululand together as sort of like a wonderful thing to experience. And yeah, it sounds magical, frankly, to be able to help these animals that have been orphaned and bring them back into the wild. So I know the big cat scenario is really, it's really kind of difficult to think through, because there are a lot of those big cats that are being used in these sort of TikToks and Instagrams and with these influencers. And one of the things that I think about are like the original influencers almost in this space, which is Siegfried and Roy. And they were quite controversial figures. I think maybe our younger listeners might not know who they are. Tristan, do you know who they are?
I was waiting for this. Maybe I'm one of the younger listeners.
I mean, I'm also so young, but I know who they are.
Yeah. I know who they are. I know that they were, I think, magicians in Las Vegas. I could be completely wrong, but I think that's them. They had an act there at like one of the big casinos. And they mostly used white tigers, I
tigers.
think. I'm just trying to think back at posters, but yeah. Sorry, carry on. As long as I'm right, am I right? Did I get some of that right?
Yes, yeah, you
Okay,
are.
cool.
And, I think it illustrates the perfect example of this line. From all, and I'm not Siegfried or Roy. I don't know the inner workings of who they were or their teams and things like that. But it seems that they really loved these animals, and they had, very lovely spaces for them, but they were in captivity. There was a lot of controversy around that. And at the end of the day, Roy ended up being attacked by one of these cats on stage in front of an audience. And he was very, very, he was harmed very badly. And so it's an interesting sort of dichotomy between having these wild animals that are meant to be wild, but also maybe loving them and caring for them and trying to give them, a good life. Again, like that line that we were talking about, but also a lot of what you don't see is the very real reality that they could harm you, and harm you, detrimentally, if not from a deadly standpoint. And even after Roy was harmed, I think he said that he had a stroke on stage and the cat was trying to help him, and it actually wasn't a mauling. And so he was even trying to defend the cat, after it happened. So I think there was a lot of love there, but at the end of the day, these are wild animals, and, you can't fully unwild, something out of something like a cat, which I think, or like a tiger. So I think that that's a really interesting example of some of these scenarios.
Yeah, I think that's exactly like kind of going back to what you were saying earlier, where, these animals, big cats especially, they don't do well if they've been born in captivity and then got rewilded afterwards. And I do that with like air quotes, because they haven't ever really been taught to hunt, but that doesn't mean that the instinct's not there. I mean, they are carnivores, they're predators, they know what they eat. And so, look, I mean, Siegfried and Roy, I have actually heard of that incident before. I didn't know that it was on stage. That must have been traumatic to witness that. But we see it here in South Africa, truth be told. Like, I wouldn't say it's all the time, but it's pretty frequent. We see on the news, and I hear, via the Bush Network, that so-and-so who was like the lion tamer or someone who was like an influencer like online with all of these lions especially, has been either mauled or like killed by a lion. And it's something that I just think to myself, like, if that happens to everybody, like, I don't understand why you do it. Like, if everybody, it seems, either gets really, really badly hurt or could inevitably actually be killed by this animal. And I just think, like, surely, guys, I mean, I don't know, it's tough. I know I certainly wouldn't be putting my hand up then to raise a lions, knowing that, like, all these people have been seriously injured by lions. But maybe that's just my personal opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I know we've talked about this. It seems to never end well. Like, there's never a great ending. It's not going to end well for the animal, and it often really doesn't end well for the human. So there's just no real positive story in this. So I think that's a good thing to think about overall. And I know, again, with that line drawing, a lot of people have fairly strong opinions about safaris. And I would wonder, obviously you work at a safari lodge. I'm a huge proponent of going on safari to support conservation efforts and making sure that there's a lot of, ability to help the overarching landscape in these areas where these animals are roaming free. But I would love, there's no one better to talk about this than you. So I'd love your thoughts on that and sort of like that line of animals sort of quote unquote in captivity.
Yeah, look, I think I know exactly what you're talking about, and that has been raised before. And I think that's a lot of people, most of the people that raise that issue are people that haven't really been on a safari themselves. So they haven't quite seen and how it operates and how it works. Especially where I work in South Africa, I know that most of the reserves and the one that I'm at, like we've got a very, very strict code of conduct. You know, we've got certain rules that honestly, if you break them or if you overcross that line, you're out. You're not there anymore for that exact reason. You know, we never want to put unnecessary pressure on animals or on sightings in general. It's not fair for you and your guests because you could be putting people in danger, and it's certainly not fair for whatever you're viewing, whatever animal that is that you happen to be viewing. And so the way that things are handled are very different and often not what people expect. Like I know that when we go into a sighting there, you know, where I am, we have a protocol where only 2 vehicles are ever allowed on a sighting. So you're not allowed, it's not like a zoo. People can't just go like flooding in and look at a lion. You know, there's very strict protocols in case. So we only have 2 vehicles in that sighting. We are only allowed 15 to 20 minutes within that sighting. Also, as guides, so as, you know, the people who are actually in charge at the end of the day of the sighting and of the people that are viewing it, it's our responsibility to manage and make sure that it's a safe environment and that that animal is happy and that animal is calm. You know, there's been a few sightings where I've arrived into that sighting and it could be leopards that are mating. So it's a male and a female, they're together. It's intense. You know, there's a lot going on. The male already is kind of feeling like he has to assert himself. He has to show his dominance. And there are times then when we arrive at that sighting and he's not happy with the vehicle being there. He's not happy with us watching it. And we quite simply then we turn on the car and we drive out of there and we make it what's called a negative lock. So nobody is allowed to go view that animal. There's other cases where we can use a leopard again as an example. Like if they happen to have a successful hunt and they've got a carcass and it's on the ground, once the sun goes down, we can't go view that animal with the carcass on the ground. That's because we don't want to draw any unnecessary attention to it so that other scavenging or other predators in the area can then steal that kill. It's just so unfair to that creature. And so I think that the way it's handled and the way that we do it is very different to like what you might think or might have seen on social media. That being said, though, I know that there are some huge issues within the safari industry. There are sometimes issues of animals that are too comfortable, especially within lodges, and you know that awareness has actually been raised fairly recently among lodges. I know especially at the reserve I am now, it's compulsory to build like proper fences around, especially the staff accommodation, so that you know these animals, lions, leopards, and especially hyenas can't actually get in there. They can't infiltrate that area because then there's just too much human-animal contact, and that's inevitably what we don't want. There are also some areas throughout Africa where, can you believe it, they're actually having an issue with over-commercialization, and a lot of that has got to do with social media. So it's pretty cool how you can link that back. I know one example of that is Kenya. You know, I personally haven't been there, but I've had a lot of guests that have come from Kenya. I know private guides that work up in Kenya, and all of them have told me that there are certain areas, we call them concessions, where you can go as a tourist, and it's done in a very ethical way. It's done in a very exclusive way, and so there's space for you and the animals. But unfortunately, within like national parks, there's just no control. I mean, I saw a video the other day. There was a male lion walking down the road, and I'm not even joking, where I think there was 60 or 70 cars like trying to view this animal. Another example of that was there was a cheetah that hunted, I believe it was a Thompson's gazelle, and it's a natural hunt, so the animal is wild in the sense that, look, it's going to go out, it's going to find its own prey, and it's going to eat. But again, like there's these game viewers that came in with these guides and the guests, and they all surrounded it, and that's a huge issue. That's something that I really think needs to be resolved, and that what the governments there should work on. And a lot of it is then almost promoted through social media, because people take these videos, and if you're someone that doesn't quite understand, you might actually think that's really cool. There's another side to that coin. So you might think it's great and then book that holiday, and then by doing so you're also promoting that behavior. So yeah, it's a difficult one for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a mix of education, people needing to understand what it is they're doing, where they're going, why they're going there, and also respect. You know, there's a real need for respect of the land, there's respect of the animals, especially respect of what these animals are doing. If there's an animal carcass, we talked about this in the predator versus prey episode, if an animal's being killed, I find it quite disrespectful for someone to film that. I understand that that's really interesting and it's a once in a lifetime experience, but I think it all comes back to that at the end of the day. And the other thing, though, with all of this is the fact that there is so much that goes into ethical safaris in terms of helping the overall landscape and the overall sort of ability for these animals to even survive in some cases. I know we've also talked a little bit about the fact that if there is a private reserve, that land can then sustain itself and not be sold off to developers or things of that nature.
Yeah.
So I think that also comes into play in terms of the fact that it's just integral to have these lodges and these private reserves exist for the sole fact of ensuring that the animals can exist as well. So it is like a real chicken and egg thing in that way, in a lot of regards.
Yeah, and I mean, especially South Africa is a great example of that because, like, really, Southern Africa in general, I know Zimbabwe is doing pretty well from that point of view, and Namibia is also putting in a huge effort. But, between those three countries, we're really the last stronghold in the entire continent for especially white and black rhino. And these areas, these private concessions that we were speaking about, they're quite often open to public land. So they're open to the government park, and that's where we don't have a say in that. Look, there are incredibly brave men and women out there that are working for the government and are in the bush every single day trying to protect these animals. But essentially, like, without some of these private concessions, I mean, the poaching rate would just explode. And so when something is done ethically, when something is managed correctly, and when tourism is used in the sense that it's bringing in money specifically to protect certain species, I mean, it's just like the best combination we have at the moment for fighting back the poachers, for fighting back the entire illegal animal trade. And so in that sense, it's so important. And then social media can be used. I mean, every lodge uses social media. Social media nowadays is such a huge platform. I mean, you won't believe how many guests I've guided, and I've asked, so how did you hear about us? Why did you come here? And it's got to be like, oh, like we saw your Instagram, or we saw the lodge's Instagram, or, this popped up and then we were so interested, we wanted to go on a safari, and then we spoke to an agent and they recommended you and the lodge and everything like that. And so, this industry relies hugely on social media. And I think personally, I'm going a little bit off the track now.
We're going on a tangent. We're going on a journey.
Yeah, join me. But I think COVID had a huge role in that because so many people were locked indoors, and this might just be like a Tristan theory, but so many people were locked indoors that we found within this industry that there were some individuals that then were fortunate enough to be like in lockdown but still in the bush, in the wild, and they were just posting content. They were posting things that they were seeing. They were posting like different experiences they've had, and their followers just skyrocketed, like it exploded. And I think COVID had a huge role to play with that because people were dying to get outside. People were dying to travel. They just wanted to get out their home. They wanted to go see somewhere new. And so I think that really that the whole safari industry then increased from there.
Yeah, I think that's really fair. I mean, also being stuck inside, I think people dreamed about what they could do once the world opened up and what their hopes and dreams would be from there, and a lot of that included going on a safari and seeing these incredible animals up close and experiencing the magic of what that would look like. So it all kind of came together for a perfect storm in some ways. I know you mentioned that there's a lot of ethics behind the work that you do, and there's times when you're really careful and discerning between the amount of cars that are involved in a sighting and things like that. But is there ever a time when, despite all of your best efforts, an animal just comes right up to you and it's like in your face? And how has that been handled and how has that felt? Like, what was that experience like?
And so there's the animal behavior is very different in the situation, in the sense that if something approaches you as opposed to you approaching it, the behavior can be completely different. And so if we, let's say, like parked by a watering hole, and we weren't like on the water's edge, but we were up maybe on the dam wall, we were around on like, one of the sides of the watering hole, and we were sitting there, and then a herd of elephants came in to drink water, and you read their behavior, you make sure, okay, maybe you've got like a little escape route over here. But typically, if they've approached that area and they know that you're there and they're calm, and you'll be able to see if they're angry or not, then it's fine. You can stay there, you can switch off, you can enjoy that sighting with your guests. Look, of course, there have been 1 or 2 sightings where I have, found the animal. And in that sense, if you stumble across something, you don't get a long time to read its behavior. And so there have been 1 or 2 times where, yes, I've bumped into something and you could just clearly see, okay, this animal is just not happy. Because you know what, they could have had a bad day. I can have a bad day. You can have a bad day. Whoever's listening, we've all had a bad day. And so these animals in that sense aren't too different to us. And so you can come around the corner and there's just like a big elephant bull. And you can just see, I don't know what's going on. Maybe he tried to get into a herd. Maybe he met a female elephant that he was wanting to breed with, and he didn't get the opportunity.
Oh,
I don't know.
I feel like
But
life is imitating art right now, Tristan. We're trying to get in with those bulls, and it's just not happening.
I'm just feeling bad for my boys out there. Oh my God. So big up. But yeah, then it's a whole different situation, and then it can be truly a little bit rattling. Hey? I mean, even though we live out there, we work out there, we're also human beings. Like, I argue that there's no God out there, boy or girl, where something is showing aggression to them, something is angry at them, and they feel like they're in a dangerous situation, but not just them and their guests. I don't think there's a God out there that's going to tell you that they're completely cool in that situation, or that it doesn't frighten them, because I think you're lying. Then personally, I'm just going to call you out, because I've had that before, and even though I've been in those situations plenty times, I still get that adrenaline buzz, that kick, and then it's like that fight or flight mode. And then that's maybe when your training kicks in. That's when you think, okay, is it best we're just going to sit here, we're going to wait this out, or we're going to try get out? And so I've had some situations where it's both. But if you can, most of the time, personally, I find it's best to just leave that sighting. If you know you can get away safely and it's better for you and the animal, then rather just get out of there. And that's what I've done a few times.
Okay. And in those times, has there ever been a situation where, for example, a big cat of some kind, I'm just visualizing, has jumped onto the top of your car, or has gotten really close to your tracker, or something like that, where you've had to make a split decision on, moving, leaving, or just letting that scenario play out and letting the animal kind of sniff around and leave the sighting?
Yeah, so luckily I've never had a big cat jump on my car. There was that video that went viral not so long ago of that leopard that jumped up on the bonnet of a Land Cruiser, of a Game Viewer. But luckily I've never been in that situation. I have definitely been in situations where, because you're driving kind of front on, sometimes around the corner, like when you stumble into something, and shame, your tracker is on the front line, at the brunt of everything. And then the animal has turned and it's either growled or snarled. And then, I'll go back to what I was saying before. Like, if you can get out of there and it's the best decision, and I believe it could be the best decision, it's hard because every situation is different and you've got to read it in the moment. Then I definitely have left those areas, and then I've made it what's called a negative lock. But if one jumped on my car, it's so funny. Where I work, we saw this video, we saw the pictures. For those of you who haven't seen, there was a situation where there was this young male leopard that actually jumped straight onto the bonnet of a Game Viewer. I don't believe there was actually a tracker on that vehicle now, when I'm going back and thinking about it. And you can only imagine, this industry absolutely exploded. Seriously, I think I got sent the video 12 times. I'm not even joking. From my aunt sent me the video as well. My 89-year-old granny somehow got this video and sent it to me and asked me, whoa, is this close to where you work? I was like, well, luckily not, Gran. but it's what do you do in that circumstance? What happens? Like, what's the best thing to do? Do you slap the side of the door? Do you try and get it off the car because it's already on the car? It could be like 2 feet in front of you, and then by hitting the door you could give it a fright. It gives you the reaction. Do you sit still and just wait for it to get off the vehicle? I don't know. I've never been in that circumstance. I hope that I never am. I think that if you can see if the animal wants to get on the vehicle, then that's when you step in and you try and make sure that it doesn't get on the vehicle, because that's really a problem. That animal is far too comfortable with you in the car.
Yeah, and I don't ask this, or we don't have this conversation to scare anyone. I think when I was a guest, I was incredibly comfortable. I felt very safe the whole entire time. But you are around these animals, and I frankly think they are quite comfortable with the car is something to think about, and in many cases it's not necessarily a harm inducing situation. It's more or less a comfort situation. Correct me if I'm wrong, Tristan, but I think the great thing is to have guides that are incredibly knowledgeable and can read situations and adapt to situations quickly, which I know we were lucky enough to have you as one of them. And Chad, shout out to Chad.
I'm blushing.
But yeah, so that's cool. And really interesting to hear your thought process behind. We are actually coming up on time, and we are going to get into one of my favorite segments that we do, where we try to trip up Tristan and his amazing animal knowledge. And it's called What the Wild, where we are going to play an animal sound, and we're going to see if Tristan knows what sound this is. Are you ready, Tristan?
Okay. Yeah, I'm ready. Let's do it.
What'd you say?
I said, let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay, here we go. Okay. Do you know what that sound is?
Your dinosaur. Is that an option?
No.
T-Rex.
It's a currently living animal.
It's alive. It's in Africa.
Yes.
Oh my word. Okay, it's got to be a cat. Surely it's a cat.
Can I give you a hint?
very angry cat. Hold on. It's definitely something that if I drove around the corner and it made that noise, I'm out of there. That's a negative lock situation, eh? Yeah, you're not going to stick around for that.
We're getting out. I think you would definitely leave if this was nearby and making these noises. I want to give you a hint around the fact that it's a cat, but I won't, sort of.
Okay, well, you can sort of maybe give me a little bit of a hint.
It's not a cat. It's not a big cat.
It's not a cat?
No.
Oh my word. Oh, then I've got no... Do you find it in Africa?
Yeah.
You find it in Africa and there's not a cat?
Yeah.
Nah. I've got no idea then. I don't know.
This.
Okay. Well, then I'm going to say like primate. Like it's got to be like a gorilla or something.
Yes.
Actually?
Yes.
Oh, no way.
Gorilla.
Okay. All right.
Good job.
Right. Okay. Something that I'm on my bucket list to go see. Unless they make that noise, then I'm never going to see another gorilla again.
No, that's fine. I think gorilla trekking is a bucket list item. We will be talking about gorilla trekking in a future episode, around the ethics around gorilla trekking. Very excited about that. But yeah. I digress. We are at time. This has been a great conversation. Thank you as always, Tristan. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in and joining us once again. Please follow us on Instagram and on TikTok. We are at heartofthewild.pod. Tune in next week as we continue to dig in on all things animal conservation and animal behaviors. And as always, let the Heart of the Wild inspire not just awe, but action. And that's it.
Amazing.
We'll chat with you soon.
Thanks, Dar.
Thanks, Tris.
Yeah, thanks, everybody. See you all soon.
Bye.
Bye.